Well, today we're talking about this concept called collaborative fundraising. And in the world of philanthropy, the number one kind of latest idea that philanthropists are thinking about is called collaborative philanthropy. So that's kind of their side of this equation. And so we're talking about how we can empower philanthropists to achieve more outstanding outcomes. So this whole idea of philanthropy in the marriage space is not new. You all have seen this before. This was a feature article in Philanthropy magazine in summer of 2016 talking about this incredible project that was going to happen in three cities around the country. And the article theme is called Closing the Marriage Gap. It was a very ambitious plan led by JP DeGance and implemented most famously in Jacksonville, Florida. You guys have heard that before. And here's something from the slide deck that you can refer back to, just talking about the size and scope of this project. It was a 40 to $50 million project that was to be implemented over 3 years. So the idea of philanthropy in the area of marriage is not new. Certain very strategic philanthropists definitely understand that investing in marriage is the most strategic way to invest in families, and investing in families is the most strategic way to change the outcomes in society. But one of the outcomes from that project was this is not the official outcome. This is some of the murmuring that began to happen around the country, was that there was a little bit of a disillusionment about the community marriage initiative model. And one of the things that was said to me, this is just a quote from a private conversation, was from a gentleman that said, "We don't believe the community marriage initiative model can be replicated." He was referring to the outstanding work done by Julie Baumgartner in Chattanooga, and but also referencing the fact that Julie is a 1 in 10 million person, and until you can replicate Julie Baumgartner, in his opinion, you can't replicate the community marriage initiative model. We don't believe that's true because while we do agree that Julie Baumgartner is a 1 in 10 million person, we also believe that 100 very dynamic leaders from 20 or 30 cities can actually work together towards some really outstanding goals. And just to kind of refresh everybody, this is kind of a statement that we're using more often in all the different spaces that we're serving in, and that is we help dynamic marriage leaders work together towards ambitious goals. And just to kind of update you guys, this is where the Marriage Initiative invests its time and energy is 25% of our mission is serving the content space. These are the authors and speakers who create resources and books and curriculum and everything in the world that can be nationally informed and can help community initiatives and churches all over the country. So that's 25% of our mission. 24% of our mission is investing in places just like what we're doing today with dynamic community leaders like yourselves. 33% of our mission happens in San Antonio as well as with church leaders around the country, and 18% of our mission serves National Marriage Week. And this is a graphic that kind of demonstrates the same thing, but kind of from a different angle, is that we use the same business process, organizational process in all four of these spaces in content, community, church, and champions. We use the same process in all of these spaces. It's a fundamental engine of co-creation. And of course, the top and the bottom are our communication pieces. National Marriage Week, which is our outbound communication, and Marriage Resource Center coming next year, which is our inbound form of communication with the public at large. Our idea with these communication pieces is that we are simply stewards of these things. We're the steward of National Marriage Week, and we want to use it for the benefit of the marriage movement broadly across the country. The same thing with the Marriage Resource Center. The Marriage Initiative will not be providing any resources on the Marriage Resource Center, but we're going to be linking people to content, community, and church leaders around the country who can provide help and hope for marriage. And so, as we said before, our work is nationally informed because we have these amazing national authors and speakers that create resources that can be used in every city in the country, people that create resources, people that do research, influencers, thought leaders, people from the faith-based world, people from the evidence-based world, people across the board that create the content that's necessary for us to advance our work. And we're revising upward the number of people we believe that are working in best class in this space. We believe now that there's 500 organizations who collectively create over 2,000 resources for marriages. But that leads us to the bad news and also the worst news. The bad news is that of all these 500 organizations, we don't believe any of them reach more than 1% of their potential audience. Usually they reach a fraction of 1% of their potential audience. And this is outlined. This is not a marriage problem or a marriage organization problem. This is a nonprofit problem. And the problem with nonprofits around the United States is beautifully articulated in a very honest way in this book, Billions of Drops and Millions of Buckets. You don't have to buy the book because the subtitle says it all. Why philanthropy doesn't advance social progress. That's the bad news. Now, the worst news is that not only are we not making progress, but we're actually falling further and further behind. This is a quote from a very significant strategist with a philanthropy group. He said, Carl, we are not narrowing the gap on social needs and human flourishing. If anything, the gap is widening. So it brings me back, it makes me think of this lady, Sandy Bates, who I was so blessed to meet shortly after we began our work in 2009. I was in the bookstore and I picked up this book, The Social Innovation Imperative. I was incredibly moved by the innovation that she brings to the social space. I found out that Sandy Bates is a passionately devout Christian lady who lived in Austin at the time. I was able to travel to Austin and meet with her on a number of occasions. She gave us a lot of really early guidance, and we knew that we had to innovate our way to a better place. Sandy was chief of innovation for Hewlett Packard and led some massive projects of innovation in the tech world for Hewlett Packard. But she stood on a stage one day and shared something that was really profound. She said, why is it that we can create things like cell phone and all these incredible pieces of technology? Why is it that we can have a cell phone that can hold 10,000 songs, and yet 1 billion people on the planet don't have clean drinking water? What's wrong with this? And this is the basis of why she was advancing this idea called social innovation, in that we need to take some of the innovation practices that we're doing in the tech world and in the business world, and we need to use these in the social space. And I think that's what we're doing in our project together. And one of the most important things that we need to do is that we need to innovate how we help capital flow to various parts of the family strengthening work. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about marriage. We don't have a problem. Our problem is not the ability to change the life and destiny of families. Our problem is not the ability to turn around troubled marriages. Our problem is not the ability to help marriages start right. The problem we have is a capital allocation problem. It's that there are billions and billions of dollars in philanthropy funding that is available to create high impact projects, but it's not flowing to the right places. And specifically, it's not flowing to our space. So that's what we need to do. And it's necessary for us to have a better funded approach because, as FSG Consulting says, that large scale social change requires broad cross sector coordination, not the isolated intervention of individual organizations. What we have in the marriage movement in the United States is a highly fractured, highly siloed industry, cottage industry of people in cities all over the country who are doing transformative work, but are not connected to one another. And most importantly, they're not helping one another. And we can't help each other because we don't have the resources available to us to make that happen. And I want to go back to the philanthropy side of this conversation. There is a giant chasm that exists between the world of philanthropy and our world of nonprofit. And that chasm is that philanthropists work in organizations that have tens of thousands of employees and billions of dollars in annual revenue, and which actually make in net profits hundreds of millions of dollars for their founders. And in fact, so many of these founders are so incredibly blessed with financial resources that they are actually struggling to be able to share those resources around the country. Again, this is a quote from a philanthropy group that said, "There are no organizations in the family space that have the capacity to receive a gift of the size we are prepared to share." Now, everyone says that we're ready, and we'd love to give it a try. It's kind of like, yeah, everybody would love to win the lottery. We would love to win the lottery of philanthropy, but unfortunately, we don't have the organizational capacity to receive the types of gifts that philanthropists are ready to give. Why is it? It's because they're willing to give a minimum gift for a lot of times for a philanthropy group might be $50 million or $100 million. And as much as we can imagine how fun that would be, it would wreck our organizations. We simply don't have the capacity. We would be overwhelmed by the tsunami of capital. So what does that mean? It means we need a different structure to help funding flow. And I believe that structure can be what's being called a donor impact fund. And we're going to be advancing this idea of donor impact funds, not only in the marriage space, but more broadly in the family space. So what is a donor impact fund and how would it flow? A donor impact fund would help funds flow into complex yet highly sophisticated projects that would achieve high impact for the donors. And this is kind of the flow of funds and how funds would flow through a donor impact fund is that certainly funds begin and initiate with the donor. They would then be passed. Very large gifts in the tens of millions of dollars would be transferred into a donor impact fund. And a donor impact fund would then transfer large chunks of funding into various collectives. And I'm going to unpack what a collective is. And then those collectives then would distribute money to the directly to the organizations that are serving. And so this is kind of what a project could look like that would be managed by a donor impact fund. This is kind of the design metrics. This is just an example. Is that we could design a project that would empower 30 content leaders, again, authors and speakers, with their organizations. We could connect them to 10 community initiatives who would work with 100 very dynamic marriage-focused churches who would be supported by some policy and research leaders, and as well as some convening teams that could help us figure out how to work together in these collectives, but ultimately supported by a backbone support organization. All working together, all of these people across the content space, the community space, and the church space working together, most importantly, helping each other. So what would this be sum total? This would be a group of 143 organizations served and supported by 4 convening teams and a backbone support organization who would collectively share $7 million in annual support. $7 million to a philanthropist is a tiny gift. It's easier to raise $100 million than it is $7 million, but we simply don't have the capacity to distribute that level of money. So we're talking about a small bite-sized piece for a philanthropist, a $7 million gift that would be repeated over 3 to 5 years. And this is how the money could be allocated. It doesn't have to be allocated this way. This would ultimately be the decision of the collectives. But this is an example of how it could be allocated. Of the $7 million, $2.1 million per year could be allocated between 30 content leader organizations at the rate of $70,000 per year. $1.75 million could be distributed and split between 10 community initiatives like yours. $2 million would be split between 100 marriage-focused churches at $20,000 each. Some money would be allocated to our policy and research leaders, as well as the convening teams, some really smart, hardworking people that would bring us together and help us work together. And then there'd be some money available for a backbone support organization. So what could the outcomes look like? Well, the outcomes for a $7 million gift would be distributed across 143 organizations and communities working together. There would be an absolute positive requirement that there be generous collaboration across the entire network, that we would be challenged to find creative ways to be mutually supportive of each other. Certainly, communities would set goals to reduce divorce rates, and I think there ought to be special awards for the most innovative work being done across those 143 organizations. But ultimately, there would be over 1 million families impacted with what's called clear and measurable impact of positive change. This is where I need your help. I need your help to help me define clear and measurable impact of positive change. This is the single most important phrase that is in the way of us receiving this kind of funding, is because in the marriage world, in the marriage space, we have all sorts of outcomes, but we're struggling mightily to define and communicate what those outcomes are. We're not able to communicate to donors what we're being able to achieve with clear and measurable impact, because donors live in the world of business usually. They might manage 40,000 employees, they might have $8 billion in revenue, and they might have two or three or 400 or 500 or 1,000 outlets. But every single day, these business leaders know the bottom line. They know their impact every single day. They have clear measurements at the bottom line, and that's the world they're used to. And when they come into our world of sloppy agape and fuzzy stories and sweet stories, but but no clarity of what's actually happening, it makes them very uncomfortable. And I think it is a huge roadblock in the way for us to be able to work more effectively with them. So let's dive in because this is where I need your help. How do we define clear and measurable impact? Well, one of the problems with being able to define it is because it is so broad. There's a gigantic array of possibilities, right? Because when we're working in the marriage space, maybe we're providing direct services, or maybe we're providing, maybe our content leaders are providing free downloadable resources, and it's a self-directed service. Some of our work is about empowering leaders. That's what re-engage and grace marriage is all about. Is you recruit lay couples and they serve as table leaders, and you empower these leaders to make a transformative impact in the lives of the marriages that are around the table. What does it cost to get that sort of outcome? And then how about the supportive roles? All the people, even beyond the marriage space, that can play a very supportive and important role in serving marriages. Uh, how can we measure the impact there? What about group events? A date night event? Uh, what sort of impact does a date night event have on the marriages of those who attend? And then there's this whole new world of micro impact campaigns and inspirational campaigns, messaging campaigns that can make a difference in the lives of marriages. Now, let's look at this from a completely different angle. Let's look at this across the spectrum or the lifespan of marriages. How much does it cost to create clear and measurable impact with engaged couples, with married couples, with enriching marriages, with struggling couples? And which of these promises the highest return on investment? Those are some things we need to define. Now, here's a completely different third angle. What's the best place to impact marriages? Is it with books and resources or events? Is it with marketing campaigns? Is it with saving couples on the brink of divorce? Which of these promises the highest ROI? Well, we don't know what this cost, and but this is my first. This is the wild guess of a maniac finance guy, which is me. Is But I don't think these are too far off. The reason why I included these is because I think it is marvelously inexpensive to create transformative impact in the lives of couples. And I think that content leaders can do that for around $7 a couple. I think community leaders can do it for even less money. Why is it? It's because community leaders are not doing direct services. We're not providing anything on the front line. We're mobilizing an army of people all across the community. It's even less expensive to do it in the community space. Now, church leaders, it's a little bit different. Why is it? It's because you're doing a lot of direct service. You're providing a lot of one-on-one with couples. It costs a little bit more to do that, even if you average it over an array of services like date night events, but also premarital counseling and other things. It's a little bit more expensive. And policy and research leaders could be the cheapest way to do it, but maybe not the best way to do it overall. The idea is that we would do this with a smart and generous strategy for mutual support is the key, is how this is really going to work well in our communities, is we find ways to help each other between the content space, the community space, the church space, and the champion space. I believe that we can impact more than 1 million families a year with a $7 million gift, with an impact of positive change that is clear and measurable. So here's some detail on what this could look like. These are some items of how we would manage the grant process and how we would administer it. It would be certainly competitive grants. We'd have evaluation measures. We would have a dashboard for the donor. We would have a high degree of discretion on behalf of the donor of how we fund things. But what the donor wants as well is they want financial transparency. We would need to give them deep transparency with an audit, a multifaceted audit, and robust reporting, and advisory boards and oversight boards to make sure we are great stewards of the funding that is given to us. But most importantly, we've got to begin with how we think about it from their shoes. If you're a philanthropist and you've invested your entire life in building a business and you've accumulated a lot of God-given assets, you want to invest those really well. And so we would help a philanthropist to achieve high ROI. That's what they want. They want impact, and we're going to give them the highest ROI possible for their investment. We're going to manage the project on their behalf. That's the beauty of a donor impact fund, is that it's managed on their behalf and it reduces their time commitment because a lot of these people don't have a lot of spare time. One of the things that they constantly tell us is that they have so many relationships in their life, they can't possibly manage 50 more relationships among the nonprofit community. And ultimately, they want privacy. They don't want something to go off the rails and for it to reflect back poorly on their business or on their legacy or on their family or on any number of things. A lot of these people are high profile, they're well known, they're protecting their reputation and the brand reputation that they've built over decades. And I think we can give them high ROI because I think that half of our outcomes can be met not by just them providing us more money, but by us helping each other in very generous ways. And ultimately, I love this idea as I'm kind of wrapping this up. Les Parrott, this is a great quote from him. He says that every single percentage point that we drop the divorce rate impacts the lives of more than 1 million children. I think that's really something to think about. And that's what I think about because when I think of why I do my work, this is why. This is Parker. She's 3 months old and she's that next generation. And we need to be building a better future for them. I love this quote that I've been using for years is that children are a voice we send to a time we'll never see. We are investing in work that has a generational impact, not only with families, but in discipleship and ultimately with reaching the world for Christ.